On April 26, 1942, the Benxi Colliery in Liaoning Province, China, became the stage for the deadliest coal mining disaster in recorded history, and the tragedy was as grim as it was preventable, making it one of those moments where history feels less like a story and more like a warning carved in stone. The mine, controlled by Japanese forces during their occupation of Manchuria, was already notorious for its brutal working conditions, where Chinese laborers were forced into back-breaking shifts under the constant gaze of overseers who valued coal production more than human life. On that spring day, a lethal cocktail of gas and coal dust ignited deep underground, producing a devastating explosion that tore through the tunnels like a firestorm, collapsing supports, filling passageways with flames, and instantly cutting off escape routes. For the miners who survived the initial blast, the nightmare had only just begun, because the fire raged uncontrollably, consuming oxygen and spewing toxic carbon monoxide, turning every breath into a fight for survival. In a decision that still shocks historians, the Japanese authorities chose to seal the mine entrances in an effort to smother the blaze, a move that protected equipment and infrastructure, but effectively trapped more than 1,000 men underground with no chance of rescue. Survivors later recalled the horrific reality as some workers suffocated within minutes while others clung to life in pitch darkness as poison gas silently overtook them. When the mine was finally reopened, the true scale of the disaster emerged with 1,549 miners having lost their lives, a death toll so massive that it still stands as the worst coal mining disaster ever recorded. Yet, beyond the staggering numbers lies a story drenched in wartime cruelty, because many of the dead were not simply workers, but conscripted laborers with little choice in their fate, people whose lives were treated as expendable in the machinery of war and industry. Contemporary reports from Japanese officials at the time downplayed the tragedy, focusing on production losses rather than human suffering, while local families grieved in silence, their voices muted by the political realities of occupation. Over the years, the Benxi disaster has come to symbolize not just the dangers of coal mining, but also the devastating consequences of prioritizing profit and control over safety and dignity. Mining, by its very nature, is dangerous work, but history has shown that disasters on this scale almost always come from negligence, lack of preparation, and callous disregard for human lives, and Benxi is perhaps the clearest and most haunting example of all. Imagine for a moment how different the story could have been if the miners had been given even the most basic protections, proper ventilation, or the chance to escape rather than being sealed in like expendable parts of a machine. Instead, the disaster became both a human tragedy and a moral indictment, a reminder that the price of neglect is often measured in lives rather than dollars. Today, when historians or safety experts look back at Benxi, it is not just the number 1,549 that shocks them, but the circumstances that allowed it to happen in the first place, such as forced labor, inadequate safety measures, and a mindset that valued coal over people. The miners who perished in Benxi never got the recognition they deserved during their lifetimes, but their story has endured as a stark lesson, reminding the world that progress and power built on human suffering is a fragile foundation destined to collapse. On the morning of October 11th, 2012, Jose Milena, a 62-year-old veteran employee at the Bumble Bee Foods plant in Santa Fe Springs, California, clocked in like any other day. For decades, Milena had been part of the humming rhythm of the plant, surrounded by conveyor belts, industrial ovens, and the constant scent of canned tuna. That morning, however, what seemed like an ordinary shift would turn into a tragedy that shook the workplace safety world. In a move that would prove fatal, Milena entered one of the plant's massive industrial ovens to perform routine work, a confined space that would ultimately become a lethal trap. His colleagues, unaware that he had gone inside, continued with their tasks, loading roughly 12,000 pounds of tuna into the oven and sealing it to begin the sterilization cycle. The oven, designed to operate at about 270 degrees Fahrenheit, started its process, effectively cooking its contents, including Milena, in a horrifyingly literal sense. By the time anyone realized he was inside, the cycle had already run, and his body was discovered hours later. It was a shocking scene, one that exposed not just a single mistake, but systemic flaws in workplace safety, confined space procedures, and oversight in industrial settings. The immediate aftermath of the incident involved a flurry of investigations, legal scrutiny, and public outrage. The California Division of Occupational Safety and Health, CalOSHA, launched a full review of the plant, uncovering significant violations related to confined space entry protocols and failure to ensure employee safety. In Los Angeles County, prosecutors charged Bumble Bee Foods and 2 plant managers, the director of plant operations and the former safety manager, with felony violations for willfully neglecting safety standards that directly led to Milena's death. The company faced fines and public scrutiny, but the incident highlighted deeper systemic issues. Industrial plants relying on human workers to enter spaces that were inherently dangerous. The absence of fail-safes to prevent such tragedies, and a workplace culture that sometimes placed productivity over safety. Milena's death became a grim cautionary tale for the food processing industry and beyond, emphasizing the need for a stricter enforcement of occupational safety laws. In the years following the tragedy, Bumble Bee Foods took legal and financial steps to address the incident, culminating in a $6 million settlement in 2015. This settlement, the largest known criminal workplace safety violation payout in California for a single fatality, included compensation to Milena's family, penalties, and mandated improvements to plant safety measures. The ovens were retrofitted with cameras. Procedures were revised to prevent employees from needing to enter active industrial machinery, and training was updated to ensure that no worker would face the same fate again. While money and regulation cannot undo the loss of a life, these measures represent an attempt to prevent similar accidents in the future and serve as a reminder that safety cannot be compromised, no matter the operational pressures of production. Jose Milena's death was a tragic loss, but it also became a catalyst for change, highlighting the human cost of workplace negligence and the vital importance of enforcing safety protocols in industrial environments. Even years later, his story remains a sobering example of what can go wrong when procedures fail, and a reminder that behind every machine and assembly line is a human life that matters. On the morning of June 2, 2022, 39-year-old Stephen Dirks reported for his shift at Caterpillar's Foundry in Mapleton, Illinois. He had been on the job just 9 days, still learning the ropes at a facility that produces cast iron engine components for construction and mining equipment, diesel engines, and industrial machinery. The plant's melt floor was dominated by massive open pots of molten iron, each holding thousands of pounds of liquid metal heated to over 2,000 degrees, roughly twice the temperature of volcanic lava. The heat radiating from the pots was intense. Workers on the platform felt it immediately on their faces and arms as they moved across the floor. The metal glowed a deep orange, shimmering like liquid fire, and flowed with a mesmerizing yet deadly fluidity. For most, these conditions were routine, but every step near the edge carried a lethal risk. Stephen's task that morning was a standard one, taking a sample of the molten iron before it was poured into molds. He carried his tools onto the platform and approached the edge of one of the 11-foot deep pots. There were no guardrails or fall protection systems in place, a violation that would later be cited by OSHA. In the heat and focus of performing his job, Stephen slipped, falling into the molten iron. The fall was instantaneous. Co-workers could only watch as he was immediately incinerated by the extreme heat. At temperatures above 2000 degrees, survival was impossible even for a single second. The molten iron swallowed him completely, leaving no time to grab anything or attempt a rescue. Work on the foundry floor stopped immediately. First responders arrived within minutes, but there was nothing to save. The pot had to be left to cool before anyone could approach, a grim reminder of the power of the molten metal. In the aftermath, federal safety investigators from OSHA determined that the foundry routinely exposed employees to unprotected fall hazards, especially those working within just 4 feet of deep ceramic containers of molten iron. The agency concluded that if proper guardrails or restraint systems had been in place, Stephen's life might have been spared. Caterpillar was cited for one willful safety violation and fined $145,27. Stephen's death was not only a catastrophic accident, but a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in industrial work. The plant employs over 800 people, Yet, even a Fortune 500 company with vast resources failed to provide basic fall protection in one of the most hazardous areas of the foundry. Stephen Dirks left behind 3 children, a family forever changed by a tragedy that could have been prevented. His story serves as a chilling warning. In industrial settings, even a routine task performed in a moment of carelessness or oversight can turn instantly fatal. The molten iron he fell into was unforgiving, and the consequences of inadequate safety measures were irreversible. The Hawk's Nest Tunnel disaster is one of those grim industrial stories that feels ripped from a dystopian novel, except it was horribly real and played out in the early 1930s in the small town of Gauley Bridge, West Virginia, when a project that was supposed to bring progress ended up writing one of the darkest chapters in American labor history. It all started with Union Carbide deciding to bore a tunnel through Gauley Mountain to divert the New River for hydroelectric power. A seemingly impressive feat of engineering that turned into a death trap for hundreds of workers. The job itself did not sound too insane at first, as the plan was to dig a 3-mile tunnel through solid rock. But the rock was practically pure silica. And when you drill through silica without water or ventilation, you are not just making a tunnel, you are basically creating giant invisible death clouds. Those clouds filled the lungs of the mostly poor men hired for the job, many of whom were African American migrants looking for work during the Great Depression. Instead of being given masks or any kind of protection, they were shoved into the dust storm with shovels, drills, and desperation, and within weeks people were coughing, wheezing, and suffocating from the inside as silicosis, an incurable lung disease, shredded their bodies. What makes this even worse is that the company knew silica dust was dangerous. The science was not some futuristic mystery, but keeping production fast and cheap mattered more than keeping workers alive. The deaths piled up quickly, yet officials tried to brush it under the rug. Some estimates say around 476 deaths were officially recorded. But survivors, families, and historians agree the real number was probably closer to 700, maybe even over 1,000, making it not just a workplace accident, but arguably the worst industrial disaster in United States history caused by occupational disease. The way it was handled only adds to the tragedy, because many of the dead black workers were buried in unmarked mass graves, their stories erased while Union Carbide cashed in on the project and the local community lived with the haunting legacy. The disaster sparked outrage among labor advocates and eventually forced the conversation about occupational safety into the public eye, leading to serious recognition of silicosis as an industrial disease. But at the time, the victims and their families were left with little more than grief, poverty, and scars of neglect. Even today, if you visit the area, the story is not front and center like you would expect for such a massive loss of life. It is remembered in patches, in poems like Muriel Rukeyser's Book of the Dead, in local whispers, in a scattering of memorials. But the echoes of those men gasping in dusty darkness still feel heavy because the disaster was not some freak accident of fate, it was preventable. It stands as a chilling reminder of what happens when human lives are treated as expendable in the name of progress. While the Hawk's Nest Tunnel looks like just another piece of Appalachian engineering, its true legacy is a cautionary tale carved into the lungs of the men who built it and buried beneath the silence of unmarked graves. It is a story that deserves to be remembered not only for its tragedy, but also as a warning about the cost of greed and negligence when safety is ignored. In the quiet city of Yuma, Arizona, a tragedy unfolded at Gowan Milling, LLC, in early January 2026 that shook the local community and highlighted the hidden dangers of industrial workplaces. Jose Fernando Partida, a 57-year-old dedicated plant worker, had spent years maintaining the equipment that kept the mill running smoothly. On January 4th, 2026, he was performing a routine task, cleaning one of the facility's large chemical mixers. What should have been a standard maintenance procedure quickly turned into a nightmare. Somehow, the industrial mixer activated unexpectedly while he was inside, trapping him in its unforgiving interior. The situation was immediately perilous. Despite the presence of co-workers who rushed to assist, the size and complexity of the machinery, combined with the chemical hazards involved, made freeing him a challenge. Emergency teams were called in, and for hours, Partida remained trapped inside the mixer, his cries for help echoing through the factory walls. Hazmat teams and first responders worked meticulously to cut power, stabilize the machinery, and safely extract him. After approximately 5 hours, he was finally freed, severely injured, and rushed to a hospital for treatment. The severity of his injuries, including broken bones, extensive bruising, and internal trauma, made it clear that his path to recovery would be long and uncertain. Despite intensive medical care, Partita's condition deteriorated over the following days, and on January 10, 2026, he passed away, leaving a grieving family and a stunned community behind. The aftermath of the accident drew attention not only because of the tragic loss of life, but also because of the broader questions it raised about workplace safety. Gowan Milling, LLC released statements expressing their condolences and confirming that emergency protocols were followed. But the incident sparked a renewed conversation about the risks industrial workers face every day. Experts and labor safety advocates emphasized that machinery of this scale should always have redundant safety measures to prevent accidental activation, particularly during maintenance or cleaning procedures. The tragedy of Partita's death serves as a sobering reminder of the fine line between routine work and catastrophic accidents in industrial settings. It also illustrated the human cost behind statistics and regulations, the pain endured by families, co-workers, and emergency responders who confront such traumatic events firsthand. In interviews with local media, Partita's son, Omar, described the harrowing hours his father was trapped and the heartbreak of losing him, capturing the deeply personal toll that these incidents impose beyond the headlines. This incident has prompted authorities, including the Yuma County Sheriff's Office and the Industrial Commission of Arizona, to launch a formal investigation. They aim to determine precisely how the mixer activated and whether there were lapses in safety procedures or equipment design that contributed to the fatal outcome. Meanwhile, community members have rallied around the Partita family, with local news outlets reporting on GoFundMe campaigns established to support medical bills and funeral expenses. The response underscores a dual reality. While industrial work powers economies and communities, it carries inherent risks that demand rigorous safeguards, thorough training, and constant vigilance. The story of Jose Fernando Partita is a tragic human tale of dedication, vulnerability, and the unforeseen dangers that can strike even the most experienced workers. It is also a reminder that workplace safety is not merely a compliance issue, but a moral responsibility, with the potential to protect or, if neglected, to cost lives. In reflecting on this tragedy, one cannot help but acknowledge the courage and commitment of industrial workers everywhere, and the urgent need for systems that prioritize human life above all else, ensuring that no routine task ever ends in such devastating loss again. On the morning of February 27, 2013, 26-year-old Jorge Perez began his shift at Golden State Container, a packaging manufacturer in Los Angeles, California. The facility specialized in producing cardboard boxes and shipping materials, and its massive warehouse was dominated by towering industrial printing presses, enormous machines that stamped, cut, and printed designs onto large sheets of cardboard. Each press was a beast of metal in motion, as big as a truck, with heavy rollers and drums that pulled entire sheets of cardboard through at high speed. The air on the factory floor thundered with the constant pounding of machinery, the rhythmic hum of industry that workers had long since learned to tune out. Jorge was no stranger to the work. He had operated near these presses before. He understood their power, but like many who spend years around dangerous machines, the familiarity had dulled the fear. That morning, Jorge was assigned to one of the larger printing presses. It was running as usual, its rollers spinning non-stop, gripping and pressing cardboard with mechanical precision. Sometime during his shift, he stepped too close. In the blink of an eye, his clothing or hand must have caught in the moving rollers, and the machine pulled him in. The steady rhythm of the press suddenly changed. Nearby workers heard the difference immediately. A harsh grinding noise followed by shouts of panic. They turned to see Jorge trapped inside the machine. Co-workers rushed forward, slamming the emergency stop button, but the machine had already clamped down with immense force. Its rollers, designed to crush cardboard flat, now held Jorge's body in their grip. No one on the floor could free him. Within minutes, Los Angeles firefighters arrived and began the painstaking process of dismantling the printing press. The work was delicate and slow. They had to take the machine apart piece by piece to reach him without causing further harm. The rescue effort stretched on for nearly an hour as the crew used tools to pry apart the massive steel components. The factory floor, usually filled with the roar of machinery, was eerily silent. Workers stood at a distance, watching in disbelief as emergency crews fought to reach their co-worker. Some wept, others prayed, but everyone knew the truth. No one could survive what that machine had done. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, firefighters pulled Jorge free, but it was already too late. The rollers had crushed him beyond saving, and the coroner pronounced him dead at the scene. For those who worked alongside him, the shock was unbearable. One moment, Jorge had been performing a routine task, something he'd done countless times before, and the next, he was gone. The incident served as a brutal reminder of the hidden dangers of industrial machinery, where one moment of distraction or one missed precaution can mean the difference between life and death. In official reports, the tragedy was reduced to a few sterile words: employee caught in printing press and killed. But behind that line was the story of Jorge Perez, a young man in his 20s who went to work one morning and never made it home, crushed inside a machine built to shape cardboard, not a take a life. On the morning of April 16, 1947, the people of Texas City, Texas, woke up to what seemed like an ordinary day. At the busy port, a French cargo ship called the SS Grand Camp was docked with a load that didn't sound particularly threatening. About 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer. Fertilizer is usually associated with farming and growth, but in certain conditions, it can become highly unstable and explosive. That morning, a fire broke out in the ship's hold, and smoke started curling into the sky. Workers tried to fight the blaze, even sealing the hatches and pumping in steam in hopes of smothering it, but the attempt only made things worse. The fire heated the chemicals inside, and just before 9 a.m., the ship erupted in a massive explosion that instantly turned the harbor into a scene of destruction. The force of the blast was staggering. It tore through the port, shattering buildings, igniting refineries, and sending shockwaves for miles. People in Houston, nearly 40 miles away, reported windows rattling from the impact. A column of fire and debris shot hundreds of feet into the air, and fragments of the ship were hurled across the city. One piece of the anchor landed more than a mile inland. The explosion was so powerful that it generated a tidal wave, tossing ships onto the shore and creating chaos both on land and water. Fires spread rapidly, and secondary explosions from nearby oil storage tanks only deepened the catastrophe. Within moments, Texas City went from a thriving port community to a disaster zone. The human cost was devastating. At least 581 people were officially killed, though the real toll was likely higher, as some victims were never identified. Over 5,000 people were injured, hospitals were overwhelmed, and more than 500 homes were destroyed, leaving thousands homeless. Rescue workers and volunteers poured in from surrounding areas, but the scale of the destruction was overwhelming, and grim scenes of search and recovery unfolded in the days that followed. Beyond the physical damage, the disaster left scars on the community that took years to heal. The Texas City disaster became a turning point in how the United States handled hazardous materials. It exposed the dangers of storing and transporting volatile chemicals without proper safeguards, and it led to significant changes in safety regulations. It also sparked one of the first major class action lawsuits against the federal government, as survivors and families of victims sought accountability under the newly passed Federal Tort Claims Act. The tragedy served as a painful reminder of how quickly ordinary materials could become deadly under the wrong circumstances. Today, the Texas City disaster of 1947 is remembered not only as the deadliest industrial accident in U.S. history, but also as a lesson in vigilance, safety, and the need to respect the sheer power of the chemicals that fuel modern industry. In September 2025, a tragic incident at a metal manufacturing plant in Incheon, South Korea, claimed the life of a 41-year-old Cambodian worker, highlighting the ongoing dangers faced by industrial laborers, especially migrant workers. While industrial machinery is designed to improve productivity, it also comes with inherent risks that demand constant vigilance and rigorous safety protocols. On that fateful day, the worker was operating heavy machinery when his glove was caught, pulling him into the device and causing fatal injuries. The event sent shockwaves through the local community and migrant worker networks, bringing renewed attention to workplace safety standards and the responsibilities of employers to protect their staff. Authorities quickly launched an investigation, examining whether the plant complied with South Korea's Serious Accidents Punishment Act, which holds management criminally accountable for workplace fatalities caused by negligence or insufficient safety measures. This incident is far from isolated, as South Korea has seen a series of industrial accidents involving both domestic and migrant workers over the years. Migrant laborers, who often work in high-risk environments, may face language barriers, lack of safety training, and limited access to legal recourse, which can increase their vulnerability to accidents. Reports following the Incheon tragedy pointed out that safety training and emergency response protocols were under scrutiny, raising difficult questions about the balance between productivity and worker protection. The Cambodian community in South Korea, as well as human rights organizations, expressed concern that foreign workers are disproportionately exposed to hazardous conditions, a reminder that labor migration, while economically beneficial, carries serious risks when safety enforcement is inconsistent. The accident also served as a sobering example of how a single moment of oversight or misjudgment can result in irreversible consequences, emphasizing the human cost behind headlines about industrial efficiency. In the wake of the accident, discussions around workplace safety intensified, drawing attention to both legal reforms and cultural attitudes toward industrial labor. Korean authorities reaffirmed their commitment to strict enforcement of safety laws, including regular inspections and penalties for violations, while companies were urged to implement more robust training and protective measures, particularly for foreign workers who might not fully understand operational hazards. Media coverage, including reports by Korea Jungang Daily and Korean news outlets, highlighted the personal story of the worker, moving beyond statistics to underscore the human tragedy behind the machinery. Families, co-workers, and communities mourned the loss, reflecting on the fragile balance between human life and industrial advancement. While the Cambodian worker's death is a stark reminder of the dangers of industrial labor, it also serves as a catalyst for dialogue, policy review, and renewed efforts to ensure that all workers, regardless of nationality, can return home safely at the end of their shift. The tragedy resonates beyond Incheon, reminding societies worldwide that progress and safety must go hand in hand, and that every life lost to preventable workplace accidents represents a profound failure of systems meant to protect human beings. On the night of July 13, 2025, tragedy struck at the Tina's Burritos factory in Vernon, California, a facility known for mass-producing frozen burritos that stock grocery store freezers across the country. It was late, long after the day shift workers had gone home, and the sanitation crew was hard at work, cleaning and prepping the machinery for the next day's production run. Among them was a 19-year-old employee, a member of the overnight cleaning team. He'd only recently started working at the plant and had been assigned to sanitize one of the industrial meat grinders, sometimes referred to as a processing kettle, a massive steel machine roughly the size of a small car, equipped with powerful blades meant to grind meat and beans by the hundreds of pounds. Around 9:30 p.m., while cleaning the machine, something went horribly wrong. According to investigators, the grinder had not been completely powered down, a vital safety procedure known as lockout-tagout, which ensures machines cannot turn on during maintenance or cleaning. As the young worker leaned in to scrub the inside of the equipment, it suddenly roared to life. Within seconds, the routine hum of the factory turned into a scene of chaos. The worker's clothing became caught in the moving mechanism, pulling him forward before he had a chance to react. Co-workers nearby heard his screams for help and rushed to shut down the machine. They slammed the emergency stop button, but the grinder didn't halt in time. When Los Angeles County Fire Department paramedics and Vernon police officers arrived, the young man was already gone. He had been pulled completely into the machine and was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities later described the tragedy as a fatal industrial mishap. In a statement to the press, Tina's Burritos confirmed the devastating incident. "We are heartbroken to confirm that a sanitation worker lost his life on Sunday night, July 13, 2025, while performing sanitation duties at our Vernon facility. He was cleaning an empty kettle that was being sanitized and prepped for the next day's production run. Despite the immediate response of co-workers and emergency personnel, he tragically passed away at the scene." The company added, "This is a devastating loss for everyone at Tina's. Our hearts are with his family, friends, and all who knew and worked alongside him. We are cooperating fully with local authorities and Cal OSHA in the ongoing investigation, and our focus remains on honoring his life, supporting those who are grieving, and maintaining the highest safety standards in our facility." Detectives with the Vernon Police Department and Cal OSHA began a joint investigation to determine how the accident occurred. They confirmed that no foul play was suspected, but emphasized that the machine had not been properly deactivated before cleaning began, a tragic oversight that proved fatal. For the young worker's family, the loss was unbearable. Their son, barely out of high school, had gone to work one summer night hoping to earn a living, and never came home. Co-workers described him as a quiet, hardworking teen who took pride in his job and was always willing to help others. His death left the entire plant shaken. One employee told reporters that his cries for help echoed through the factory, a sound they would never forget. In the end, official reports reduced the unimaginable to a single, cold line. "Employee cleaning machine falls into grinder and is killed." Behind those sterile words was the story of a 19-year-old whose life ended in seconds. A young man consumed by a machine built to process food, not people. His death became a haunting reminder that in industrial settings, one missed safety step can mean the difference between life and death. The story of the Monongah mining disaster of 1907 is like something out of a dark industrial-era nightmare, the kind of tragedy that makes you stop and wonder how people ever signed up for this job in the first place. Picture a small West Virginia town, cold December morning, and hundreds of miners, many of them immigrants from Italy, Hungary, Poland, and other parts of Europe, heading down into the Fairmont Coal Company's mines number 6 and Nonate. These guys were the backbone of the industrial boom, digging out coal to fuel America's rapid growth. But on December 6th, everything turned into chaos. At about 10:30 in the morning, a massive explosion ripped through the underground tunnels, sending shock waves that shook the ground above like an earthquake. Houses rattled, windows shattered, and people in the town rushed out thinking the world itself might be splitting in two. The blast was caused by a lethal mix of coal dust and methane gas, which in a poorly ventilated mine is basically like stacking dynamite and waiting for someone to strike a match. The explosion ripped through the mine shafts, collapsing tunnels, blowing machinery apart, and releasing a wave of deadly carbon monoxide that suffocated nearly everyone inside. Official reports put the death toll at 362, but locals whispered it was way higher, maybe closer to 500 or more, since many unregistered immigrant workers and even teenage boys were inside that day. The sheer scale of loss was staggering. Entire families were torn apart because fathers, sons, and brothers often worked side by side underground. And when disaster struck, it wiped out multiple generations in one horrific instant. Rescue attempts were brave but grim. Teams went down into the choking blackness, hoping to pull survivors out, but most of what they found were lifeless bodies. The gas was so thick and poisonous that even the rescuers themselves sometimes collapsed before making it back out. Above ground, the town of Monongah turned into a scene of heartbreak, with wives, mothers, and children crowding around the mine entrances waiting for news that never came. Church bells rang. Funeral processions stretched on, and cemeteries filled faster than anyone could have imagined. Some widows were left with 6 or 7 children to raise on their own, and immigrant families who had already sacrificed everything to come to America now found themselves broken and destitute. There were stories of women fainting when they saw the wagons carrying out bodies, of children crying at the mine gates, and of local officials struggling to even count the dead properly because so many workers had never been formally registered. The whole town was drenched in grief, and yet the mine owners at the time offered little more than token compensation. A few dollars to families, hardly enough to buy food for a week, let alone rebuild a shattered life. The scale of indifference was almost as shocking as the explosion itself, a cruel reminder of how little power laborers had in that era. But the Monongah disaster was not just another tragic entry in the long list of industrial accidents. It became a turning point that forced America to take a harder look at mine safety. Public outrage eventually led to the creation of the United States Bureau of Mines in 1910, which was tasked with investigating explosions, improving ventilation, and making sure safety measures were enforced. Of course, change was slow and mining remained dangerous for decades, but Monongah stood as a grim symbol of what happens when profit is placed above human lives. Today, the disaster is remembered with memorials in both West Virginia and in Italy, since so many of the victims were Italian immigrants whose names and stories live on through descendants. Walking through Monongah today, you will not hear the roar of the mines, but you will see monuments that quietly tell of the day the town lost nearly everything in a single blast. It is a story of loss, resilience, and the harsh price paid in the pursuit of coal, but it also serves as a reminder of how human suffering can sometimes push the world toward change. The Monongah mining disaster might be more than a century old, yet its echoes still rumble in history, reminding us that behind every lump of coal once stood a man who risked his life to dig it from the earth. On January 12, 2026, tragedy struck at the Hiranyakeshi sugar factory in Sankeshwar, Karnataka, when Sachin Yamanani, a daily wage worker, lost his life in a horrific industrial accident. Sachin was performing routine work, loading lime into a crusher unit, when he slipped and fell into a moving conveyor belt. The high-speed machinery left no room for rescue, and he suffered fatal injuries on the spot. Co-workers attempted to stop the machine and help him, but the effort was unfortunately unsuccessful. What should have been a routine workday ended in devastating loss for Sachin's family, colleagues, and the local community. Industrial accidents like this expose the often harsh realities faced by laborers in manufacturing and processing industries. In sugar factories, workers are frequently in close proximity to high-risk machinery, including crushers, conveyors, and boilers. Yet, safety protocols are sometimes inadequate or poorly enforced. In this case, investigators are examining whether the factory had sufficient protective barriers, emergency stop mechanisms, and proper worker training in place. These are essential elements in industrial safety, designed to prevent exactly this kind of fatal accident. The fact that a worker could come into direct contact with moving machinery underlines a critical lapse in safety management. Local authorities and the Sankeshwar police immediately began an investigation, seeking to determine whether negligence played a role in the accident. Early reports indicate that while the factory was operational under normal conditions, certain safety measures may have been overlooked or insufficiently maintained. This incident has sparked broader discussions on workplace safety standards in Indian sugar factories, highlighting the pressing need for both enforcement of existing regulations and the implementation of stricter preventive measures. Industrial machinery accidents remain a serious risk worldwide, but incidents like this emphasize that preventable hazards still claim lives when safeguards fail. Media coverage of Sachin's death has been reported by major outlets such as Times of India, which detailed the circumstances of the accident and the police investigation. Read here, local news channels, including Public TV English, also reported on the tragedy, providing eyewitness accounts and coverage of the rescue attempt. Video footage circulating on YouTube captures the emergency response and aftermath, offering a sobering reminder of how quickly routine industrial tasks can turn deadly when safety is compromised. Watch here. Beyond the immediate tragedy, the incident raises larger questions about worker protection in industrial environments. Daily wage workers like Sachin often face high physical demands and minimal safety assurances, making them particularly vulnerable. While machinery is designed to improve efficiency and productivity, the human cost is significant when risk mitigation measures are insufficient. Advocates for industrial safety stress the importance of mandatory safety training, regular machinery inspections, and protective equipment for all personnel operating near high-risk equipment. This accident underscores the urgency of these measures and serves as a cautionary example for factories across India and beyond. In remembering Sachin Yamanani, it is clear that industrial safety cannot be treated as optional or secondary. Factories have a duty of care to their workers, and failure to provide adequate safeguards can have tragic consequences. This incident is a stark reminder that every worker deserves a safe environment, and that industrial progress must never come at the cost of human life. While the investigation continues, the broader lesson is urgent and universal. Prevention is far better than reaction, and rigorous enforcement of safety standards is essential to ensure that no more lives are needlessly lost to avoidable accidents. On February 9, 2019, Daniel Hill, a 54-year-old worker from South Lyon, Michigan, began what should have been another ordinary shift at Michigan Seamless Tube, a steel manufacturing company known for producing heavy-duty metal tubing. That day, Daniel was assigned one of the plant's most dangerous tasks, checking the acid tanks, enormous open vats filled with boiling sulfuric acid, heated to around 160 degrees. The acid solution, maintained at a concentration of roughly 10 to 12%, was used to strip rust and impurities from steel tubes before they were processed further. Daniel was relatively new to this part of the job, and the task required him to walk across a narrow, elevated platform that ran above the tanks. The air was thick with a sharp, chemical mist that burned the eyes, nose, and throat. The metal grating beneath his boots was slick with condensation. Just after 12:20 p.m., something went terribly wrong. Daniel slipped and fell directly into one of the acid vats. Two of his co-workers immediately rushed to the scene, fighting through the fumes to pull him out of the scalding liquid. Within moments, they managed to drag him free, but the damage was already catastrophic. The acid had eaten through his clothing instantly, burning deep into his skin and muscle tissue. Witnesses later said it was one of the most horrifying things they had ever seen. Panicked workers dragged Daniel beneath an emergency safety shower, desperately trying to rinse away the acid as he screamed in unimaginable pain. But the chemical reaction was unstoppable. The acid had already soaked through much of his body, leaving his skin peeling and raw. Despite his agony, Daniel remained conscious as his co-workers tried to help him. When the South Lyon Fire Department arrived, they quickly transported him to the University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor. According to Fire Chief Robert Vogel, Daniel endured some of the worst pain imaginable. Doctors did everything they could, but the acid had penetrated too deeply, burning through his skin, muscle, and tissue from the inside out. For nearly 11 excruciating hours, Daniel clung to life, suffering injuries that covered almost his entire body. At 11:30 that night, he finally succumbed to his wounds. Michigan Seamless Tube later released a statement expressing condolences. A valued Michigan Seamless Tube employee was involved in a serious industrial accident on Saturday afternoon. The employee was taken to the University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor. He did not survive his injuries and passed away at the hospital. The company is conducting a comprehensive investigation and is cooperating fully with the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Investigators from MIOSHA, the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, later confirmed that Daniel had been checking the acid's concentration when he fell. Their report, chilling in its simplicity, summarized the event in a single sterile line. Employee falls into tank of sulfuric acid and is killed. Months later, state regulators fined Michigan Seamless Tube $2,500 for safety violations. They found that the acid tanks lacked proper guardrails and anti-slip measures, and that workers were not adequately trained for the hazards of working around open vats of acid. Daniel Hill left behind a loving family, children and grandchildren, people whose lives were shattered by one tragic moment. His death was described as slow and agonizing, the result of a preventable accident in a workplace that underestimated its risks. It stands as a grim reminder that in industrial settings, even a single oversight can turn a routine task into a nightmare, and that every safety measure ignored can cost a life. On the morning of March 20th, 1905, the city of Brockton, Massachusetts, was alive with the steady rhythm of industry. At the Grover Shoe Factory, one of the area's most important employers, workers filed in as usual, expecting another long day of stitching leather, gluing soles, and keeping production lines moving. The 5-story brick building stood proudly as a symbol of progress and opportunity, housing nearly 400 men and women who relied on it to provide for their families. But in the basement, hidden from sight, a much older and more dangerous presence lurked. The factory's steam boiler, a piece of equipment that powered much of the operation, had been running past its prime, and while it had been patched and checked, it was ultimately a ticking time bomb waiting to ignite disaster. Just before 8 a.m., the unimaginable happened. With a deafening roar, the boiler exploded with such force that it tore through the basement and shot upward, ripping apart the floors above it like paper. The initial blast was so violent that it destroyed the main support columns, causing massive sections of the building to collapse instantly. Those on the lower floors were caught completely off guard, buried beneath falling beams and heavy machinery. The explosion also ignited fires that quickly spread, fueled by shoe materials like leather, fabric, and adhesives, all highly flammable. In moments, what had been a bustling factory was transformed into a nightmare of smoke, flames, and twisted wreckage. Workers screamed for help as the fire consumed the building, and those who managed to survive the initial collapse scrambled desperately for exits that were either blocked or already engulfed in flames. Rescue efforts began immediately, but they were harrowing and dangerous. Firefighters, police, and townspeople rushed to the scene, pulling survivors from the wreckage and braving the inferno to save those still trapped inside. Yet for many, it was too late. The heat was so intense that rescuers could not reach parts of the factory until hours later, by which time the devastation was complete. By the end of the day, 58 people had lost their lives, and more than 150 others were injured, making it one of the deadliest industrial accidents in Massachusetts history. Entire families were shattered, as the victims were not just workers, but fathers, brothers, sisters, and sons, whose livelihoods had been tied to the Grover Shoe Factory. The city of Brockton was plunged into mourning, its tight-knit community shaken to its core. Churches held memorials, streets filled with grieving relatives, and the disaster became the defining tragedy of the town's history. Even those who had not lost loved ones could not escape the weight of sorrow, as the smoke rising from the destroyed building lingered as a haunting reminder of what had been lost. The disaster did not simply fade into memory. In the aftermath, investigators examined the wreckage and found clear evidence that the boiler had been poorly maintained and was no longer safe for operation. Public outrage grew, and the tragedy became a powerful call for reform. Massachusetts soon passed stricter regulations on boiler inspections, setting new standards that would eventually spread across the United States. The Grover Shoe Factory disaster became a grim reminder of the dangers of neglecting industrial safety, especially in an era when factories were rapidly expanding and workers often faced hazardous conditions. For the people of Brockton, it was more than just a news headline. It was a collective scar, a moment when progress had come at a terrible cost. Today, the disaster stands as both a cautionary tale and a turning point, reminding us that safety must never be taken for granted in the pursuit of industry. On the morning of September 17, 2025, the Palermo's pizza production facility in West Milwaukee was operating like any other day. Machines whirring, conveyor belts moving dough and toppings along the line, and employees focused on keeping the factory running smoothly. Among them was Robert Sharon, 45, a longtime employee who split his time between management and hands-on work on the production floor. Sharon was known for his dedication, expertise, and familiarity with the machinery that powered the plant. On that day, however, the routine and predictability of the factory would turn tragic. While working near one of the robotic machines, he was caught in a catastrophic accident. Despite the immediacy of emergency response efforts, Sharon was pronounced dead at the scene, a sudden loss that shocked his colleagues, the community, and the broader industrial world. The incident was not just a tragic death. It was a stark reminder of the risks inherent in modern industrial workplaces, especially those that integrate complex machinery with human labor. The Palermo's pizza plant had long relied on robotic machinery to maintain efficiency, consistency, and speed in its production process. Robots, like the one involved in Sharon's accident, are designed to perform repetitive tasks with precision, reducing human error and increasing output. Yet, as this tragedy demonstrated, even the most advanced systems are not without danger. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, launched an immediate investigation to determine how a routine interaction with the machine could turn fatal. The investigation looked into whether safety protocols were in place, whether emergency shutoffs were accessible, and whether training procedures were sufficient for employees who regularly worked alongside such powerful equipment. The scrutiny highlighted the delicate balance that factories must maintain between technological efficiency and worker safety, a balance that, when disrupted, can have devastating consequences for the Palermo's pizza team and the local community. The loss of Robert Cherone was deeply personal. Colleagues described him as hardworking, reliable, and someone who approached every task, whether managerial or manual, with professionalism and care. His death prompted an outpouring of grief and concern, but also reflection on workplace safety standards in facilities that operate with high-powered, automated machinery. The accident became a sobering example of why strict adherence to safety protocols, proper training, and the integration of fail-safes are critical in environments where humans and machines interact. Beyond the individual tragedy, Cherone's death sparked conversations in industrial and regulatory circles about how to prevent similar accidents in the future. The hope, painfully, was that lessons learned from this loss would lead to stronger protections for other workers, ensuring that automation enhances human labor rather than endangers it. Robert Cherone's passing is remembered not only as a tragic accident, but also as a cautionary tale about the intersection of technology, labor, and safety. Factories today are increasingly automated, relying on robotics to maximize productivity. But this incident serves as a stark reminder that even the most sophisticated machinery can become deadly without proper safeguards. The Palermo's pizza plant, law enforcement, OSHA, and industry experts continue to examine the circumstances, striving to prevent another life from being lost under similar conditions. For his co-workers, family, and the broader industrial community, the hope is that Cherone's legacy will not only honor his dedication and hard work, but also reinforce the critical importance of workplace safety in a world where humans and machines coexist in close quarters. His death, while profoundly tragic, underscores the need for vigilance, accountability, and continuous improvement in industrial safety practices across the nation. It started as just another morning shift at the Bumble Bee Foods plant in Santa Fe Springs, California. On October 11, 2012, Jose Milena, a 62-year-old employee who'd worked there for years, clocked in before dawn. He knew the routine like the back of his hand. Load the carts with tuna, slide them into the industrial ovens, seal them tight, and let the massive pressure cookers do their job. These weren't ordinary ovens. Each one stretched over 30 feet long, capable of holding thousands of cans at once. When sealed, the chamber filled with superheated steam, climbing to around 270 to cook the tuna perfectly. It was dangerous equipment, the kind of machinery that demanded strict safety measures and constant awareness. That morning, amid the noise of forklifts, rattling carts, and clanging metal, Jose stepped into the oven to check the carts he'd just loaded. Nobody saw him go in. On a busy floor with dozens of workers moving at once, his absence barely registered. A co-worker, assuming Jose had stepped away to the bathroom, closed the steel door, locked it, and started the cooking cycle. The oven sealed shut with a heavy clang. Steam began to pour through the pipes as the temperature climbed. Inside, Jose was trapped. Once the system was engaged, there was no manual release. It had to complete its full 2-hour cycle before it could be opened again. As the factory continued its routine, stacking pallets, running forklifts, and cycling ovens, no one realized Jose was missing. 2 hours later, when workers opened the oven expecting cooked tuna, they were met with a scene that would haunt them forever. Jose Milena had been inside the entire time. Deputy District Attorney Hoon Chun, a man who had prosecuted over 40 murder cases, later called it the worst circumstances of death I have ever witnessed. He added grimly, "If you had to choose a way to die, you'd rather be shot or stabbed than slowly cooked in an oven." The horrific tragedy sent shockwaves through California and drew the attention of state investigators and federal workplace safety officials. The California Division of Occupational Safety and Health concluded that Bumble Bee Foods had failed to properly assess the dangers of working near those industrial ovens and lacked effective safety systems to prevent such a disaster. The company was initially fined $74,000, but that was only the beginning. Years later, after lengthy legal proceedings, Bumble Bee Foods agreed to pay $6 million to settle criminal charges, the largest workplace death payout in California history. The settlement included $1.5 million directly to Milana's family, along with additional fines and a promise to overhaul factory safety nationwide. As part of the agreement, Bumble Bee was required to upgrade its oven so workers could never be trapped inside again, and to implement new training programs focused on safety awareness. The company's plant operations director, Angel Rodriguez, and former safety manager Sol Flores were also charged. Flores, 42, pleaded guilty to a felony violation of workplace safety laws and received 3 years probation and nearly $19,000 in penalties. Rodriguez, 63, agreed to perform 320 hours of community service, take safety courses, and pay fines totaling around $11,000. In a public statement, Bumble Bee said, "We will never forget the unfathomable loss of our colleague, Jose Milena, and we are committed to ensuring employee safety remains our top priority." But for those who knew Jose, no amount of money or corporate promises could erase what happened that morning. How an ordinary shift in a seafood plant turned into one of California's most horrifying industrial accidents, when a man was literally cooked to death in the same oven built to prepare tuna,